783 days. That was how long they kept Daniel Mercer in a cage for something he never did. No anger management class softened it. No prison chaplain found the right scripture for it. No amount of staring at a concrete ceiling at 2 in the morning made the betrayal hurt any less. Time did not heal it. Time just taught it to sit still, heavy and watchful, like a dog that had decided never to trust the hand that once fed it. But on the morning of April 22nd, 2025, the cage opened, and the man who walked out of Red Hollow Federal Correctional Institution outside Marlow, Oklahoma, was not the same man who had walked in. That man had still believed in context, in misunderstanding, in the possibility that if you laid the facts out cleanly enough, decent people would eventually do the decent thing. This one did not. This one believed in paperwork, in timing, in silence, in letting a man finish building the trap he thought he was setting for someone else. The morning started badly, which was fitting. Most important mornings in my life had started badly. The fluorescent tube over my bunk had been flickering for 3 straight nights, stuttering light across cracked cinder block and making sleep feel like a technicality. The corrections officer assigned to release processing was a broad, middle-aged man with a yellow stain on the front of his uniform shirt and the energy of someone whose soul had unionized years ago. He looked at his clipboard more than he looked at me. Mercer Daniel, 49, release date today. That's me, I said, unless someone else wants it. He did not laugh. Nobody in Red Hollow laughed before breakfast. They returned my personal property in a brown paper sack that looked older than some of the men inside. Wallet, $71 in cash, a cheap key ring with keys to a truck I no longer owned, my wedding band, which I still wore even though I had long since stopped pretending I wore it for romance. It was habit now. Memory reduced to metal. There was also a black t-shirt I had never seen before and had no intention of claiming. I put everything in my pockets except the shirt. A man needs some standards, even on release day. At 7:38 a.m., the final gate opened. I stepped through and stopped for 1 second, just to breathe. Freedom smells different. I do not care how dramatic that sounds. It does. It smells like gasoline and dust and the first warmth coming off a highway shoulder. It smells like coffee too far away to reach in wet earth and whatever green thing is trying to come back to life just beyond the chain link. It smelled like motion, like choice, like the exact opposite of routine. I stood there breathing it in while the Oklahoma wind moved across the lot and lifted the hem of my prison-issued jacket, and for one brief second, I was just a body outside a wall. Then I saw Ruben Salazar. He was leaning against an old silver Silverado with one boot crossed over the other, cowboy's cap pulled low, one hand wrapped around his own coffee. He looked like he always looked, weathered, solid, unimpressed by theatrics, the kind of man who could stand in a hurricane and make the storm feel underdressed. Now, I need you to understand something about Ruben Salazar. The man had called me Daniel exactly 3 times in my life. Once at my mother's funeral. Once when he thought I was having a stroke on a hospital expansion site in 2008. And once in court the day they sentenced me. Every other minute of our friendship, I had been Danny. Not Dan. Not Mercer. Danny. That one word carried more warmth than most people manage with a whole paragraph. He didn't say anything when I got close. Just stood up straight, grabbed my hand hard, then pulled me into a one-armed hug and hit my back twice. "You look terrible," he said. "I spent 2 years in Red Hollow, Ruben." Still. He stepped back and looked at my face the way old friends do, reading damage and deciding what to say out loud. "You eat yet, Danny?" We got into the truck. There was a paper bag from Brown's on the seat between us and a large black coffee in the cup holder. My name was written on the lid in thick black marker. Danny, not typed, not scribbled by a cashier, written by hand. That nearly broke me harder than anything prison had done. I picked it up with both hands, and stared at it for a long moment without speaking. Reuben let the silence stand. That was one of his gifts. He never attacked quiet just because it made other people uncomfortable. He let it do its work. We pulled out onto the frontage road, the prison shrinking in the side mirror, and when it was just another ugly structure behind us, he said the name. Caleb called me. There it was. My son. Just 2 syllables sitting in the truck between us like something live and dangerous. When? Yesterday. What did he want? Reuben kept his eyes on the road. He wanted to know if I knew what time you were getting released. I stared out the window at a feed store, a billboard for personal injury lawyers, a gas station with 2 pumps and a rusted ice machine, the broad plain fact of Oklahoma slipping into Texas, one indifferent mile at a time. And did you? I did. And what did you tell him? Reuben adjusted one hand on the wheel. I told him I didn't. That was loyalty. Not loud, not sentimental, just exact. My son couldn't drive 2 hours himself. Couldn't stand in that lot with the wind in his face and look at the man he sent away. Couldn't show up with a cup of coffee and my name on it and whatever apology he might finally have dragged up from wherever he'd buried it. He sent a phone call through my best friend instead. What does he want, Reuben? He let out a slow breath. He's in trouble, Danny. Real trouble. Of course he was. What kind? Reuben reached behind the seat with one hand and dropped a large manila envelope into my lap. My name was written across the front in handwriting I recognized instantly. Caleb's. Careful. Deliberate. Slightly overcorrected, ever since he broke his wrist at 15 and had to teach his hand not to rush. He mailed that to my house 3 weeks ago, Reuben said. Asked me to put it in your hand the second you got out. I turned the envelope over once. Didn't open it. Not yet. What kind of trouble? I asked again. Reuben looked out through the windshield, through the next mile and probably the next year. Business is gone. They filed Chapter 7 in January. The Uptown office is shut. The Highland Park condo sold under pressure in February. Lena left right after New Year's. He's renting a place in Garland now. Cheap side. Good, said the part of me I did not like. I didn't say it aloud. I was angry, not stupid. We drove in silence for a while after that. I ate my sandwich and drank my coffee and watched the world widen. The last time I had seen my son clearly had been in a courtroom in Dallas County. He stood with one hand on the witness rail, shoulders bowed just enough to read as grief, voice broken in exactly the places it needed to break. He looked at 12 jurors and a judge and said that I had become unstable, that I had been volatile for months, that the cocaine found in his home had to be mine because I had not been myself, that the fight the night Lena fell had begun because of me, that the miscarriage she suffered afterward was a tragedy no one could untangle, but that my presence, my anger, my instability had started the chain. He looked me in the eye and lied, and every night in prison I replayed his face in that moment. Only later did I understand what I had actually been seeing. Not grief, relief. Reuben's house sat in Oak Cliff under 2 old live oaks that dropped enough leaves every year to keep him permanently offended at nature. Nina Alvarez was waiting on the porch when we pulled up, laptop open, legal pad on her knee, dark hair pinned up, expression already halfway through the next task. Nina was Reuben's neighbor and, more usefully, a paralegal at Foster, Kim, and DeLeon downtown. She was sharp in the useful way, precise, unromantic, the kind of woman who could cut through 10 lies without raising her voice above polite. She stood when she saw me. Daniel. She hugged me once, quickly. Nina was not a hugger. The fact that she tried told me the day was about to get heavier. Then she stepped back and said, "Sit down before you open that envelope." You know what's in it? Reuben rubbed the back of his neck. I made a copy. Nina turned her laptop toward me. Caleb changed his beneficiary designations almost 2 years ago, she said, 4 weeks after your conviction. As of today, you are the sole beneficiary of every remaining asset still standing in his name. The residue of the company, the commercial holdings, the account balances, what's left of the investment portfolio, all of it. I looked at the screen. My name. His name. Lists of assets reduced to neat boxes and legal phrases. The architecture of collapse is always tidy on paper. So guilt was real. I had believed that much already. Caleb Mercer had looked at what he had done and flinched somewhere deep enough that he moved documents to compensate for what character would not let him confess. He thought the company would recover. He thought the marriage would hold. He thought the lie would outlast the truth. Nothing held. "There's more," Nina said. Of course there was. She turned a page on her legal pad. "I pulled records on Lena, on the miscarriage." Reuben looked down at his boots. I looked at Nina. "Say it." She held my eyes. "St. Gabriel Medical Center, March 2023. OB notes indicate acute physical trauma consistent with a fall in the home, elevated stress markers. There were also traces of cocaine exposure in her system." The porch went still. "Secondhand," Nina said. "Environmental, not personal use." That landed cleanly. Cleanly and horribly. "It wasn't you, Daniel. It never was." I sat with that. Not because I doubted her. Because hearing the outline of a truth you already know and hearing it spoken aloud from records are two different experiences. My son had watched me be handcuffed, processed, tried, and buried in federal prison over something he knew had begun inside his own home and inside his own choices. I looked at Reuben. "Say it." He didn't look up at first. Then he did. "I watched them take you," he said. "I sat there in that courtroom and watched your own boy point at you. I should have dug harder before the verdict. I should have pushed harder. I should have—" "You're here now," I said. He nodded once and put his cap back on. That ended that. I still didn't know what I was going to do with any of it. The envelope, the records, the estate, the wreckage of a son who had burned his father to save himself. But I knew one thing with the cold certainty of a man who had spent 783 days with his own thoughts. Caleb Mercer needed something from me. And for the first time in more than 2 years, I was holding every card. I sat there another 20 minutes without opening the envelope. Then Nina's phone buzzed on the porch railing. She looked at the screen, then at me. "Don't tell me." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look did it for her. I stood up slowly and set the envelope on the porch chair. "Is he at the end of the street?" Reuben was already on his feet. "You want me to send him away?" "No." Nina closed the laptop. I wish I could tell you I was ready. I wasn't. A man can rehearse a confrontation in a cell for 2 years and still get blindsided by the simple fact of his own child walking up a front path looking like life has already punished him and still plans to continue. Caleb looked terrible. Not tired. Used up. Thinner in the wrong way, the kind that comes from neglect instead of discipline. His jacket had once been expensive and now hung on him like something bought for a different man in a different year. His hair needed cutting. The skin around his eyes looked bruised with bad sleep and old shame. He stopped at the foot of the steps. We looked at each other. 783 days of imagined speeches between us, and not one word came out for several seconds. Then he said, "Dad." One word. But the way he said it, quiet, cracked, like something in him had split and never healed straight, hit somewhere in my chest I had no intention of acknowledging. "Caleb," I said. Not son, not kid, not anything soft, just Caleb. He heard the difference. "Can I come up?" "Barely." He came up. He looked at Reuben, who looked back at him with the expression of a man who had chosen his side and did not care to revisit the matter. He looked at Nina, who made no attempt to soften herself. Then he looked at me again. "You look good," he said. "Don't do that." "I just Don't. He swallowed and nodded. Good. At least he still knew when he'd said something stupid. We went inside. Ruben's living room was exactly what I needed it to be. Ordinary. A too large television, mismatched chairs, a football blanket over the couch arm, the deep, practical comfort of a house owned by a man who did not waste energy impressing anyone. Nina took the chair by the window with her legal pad. Ruben stayed in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. I sat in the wooden chair opposite the couch. Caleb perched on the couch's edge as if he didn't trust the cushions to hold him. "You got the envelope?" he asked. "I got the envelope." "Then you know." "I know what's in it. What I don't know is why." He dragged both hands down his face. "Dad." "Caleb." "Why?" The room went very quiet. Outside, somewhere on the block, a lawnmower started up, cheerful and stupid and indifferent. "I panicked," he said finally, looking at the floor. "When everything started collapsing. The business, the investors, Lena, all of it. I thought if something happened to me, if I lost everything, at least you would have—" I cut him off. "You thought naming me beneficiary over an estate built on a lie was the right thing to do?" He flinched. Yes, I was glad he flinched. "I need your help," he said. There it was. Not apology, not confession, a request. He kept going. "The estate, what's left of it, there are creditors. 3 of them are threatening litigation. If you sign the remaining property interests back to me, I can negotiate. I can leverage them, restructure, keep this from turning into total liquidation." I leaned forward. "So that's what this is." He opened his mouth. I didn't let him continue. "You drove here on the day I walked out of prison to ask me to sign something." "Dad, I'm not finished." "No," I said. "I am." My voice was low enough that everyone in the room heard every word. "You framed me, Caleb. You stood in a courtroom and pointed at me and told strangers I was responsible for what happened to Lena. You looked me in the eyes and lied. They believed you. I went to Red Hollow. So before you say another word about property, leverage, restructuring, or any other clean business word you found to wrap around this, I need you to understand something very clearly." I paused. "I know everything." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Nina answered from the chair without looking at him. "St. Gabriel Medical Center, March 2023. OB report. Acute trauma from a fall in the home. Cocaine exposure. Environmental, not Daniels." The color left his face. His mouth opened and nothing came out at first. I had imagined this moment many times in prison. In those rehearsals, I always felt triumphant. What I actually felt was heavier than that, harder to hold. "Dad, His voice broke. "Lena and I were in a bad place. I was using. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean for any of it to—" "But it happened." He nodded once. "And instead of standing there and owning it, you handed them my name. I was scared. So was I." My voice stayed perfectly level. "I was scared every single day in Red Hollow. Scared, humiliated, angry, and alone. But here I am." No one moved. From the kitchen doorway, Ruben made a rough sound in his throat and stopped it there. I did not look at him. If I looked at Ruben then, I might see the softness I was trying not to feel, and I could not afford that yet. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. Caleb looked up fast. "I'm not saying never. I'm saying not today. Not like this." I stood. That ended the conversation. He knew it. "You're going to leave your current contact information with Nina. Then you're going to go back to Garland, or wherever you're sleeping tonight. And you're going to wait." His voice came out younger than a 32-year-old man would have wanted. "Wait for what?" "For me to decide what I'm going to do with everything you handed me." I walked to the front door and opened it. "You gave me your estate, Caleb. You gave me the evidence. You gave me every card in the game. The least you can do now is give me a few days to decide how I want to play them." He stood there a second longer. Up close, I could see what desperation had done to him. Also, what shame hadn't done. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." That was the worst part. I believed him. "I know you are," I said. I did not say it was enough. I held the door open. Eventually, he walked through it, down the steps, and back to the compact sedan he was driving now that the Range Rover and the corner office were both gone. I watched him pull away. Reuben appeared beside me with a fresh cup of coffee and said nothing. I didn't know yet that Caleb had still left something out, something important, something that would change every calculation I was about to make. The next morning began with coffee and Nina Alvarez's legal pad. She was back on Reuben's porch at 7 sharp, laptop open, 2 fresh highlighters uncapped beside it like scalpels. Reuben was in the kitchen making eggs and bacon. Sports radio droned in the background and nobody cared. I sat down across from Nina and waited. "I've been thinking about the estate all night," she said. "More specifically about what Caleb didn't tell you." I said nothing. She turned the laptop toward me. "One of the 3 creditors threatening litigation is a man named Conrad Vale, private investor, Frisco. Caleb borrowed $450,000 from him in 2023. Personal guarantee. No bank, no corporate shield, just paperwork and ego. He's 14 months past due." She tapped the filing notice on the screen. "Vale filed civil action last month. Hearing is in 10 days. I read the caption. Conrad Vale, plaintiff. Caleb Mercer, defendant. If Vale wins, and he will, anything Caleb controls becomes reachable. Anything he can leverage becomes vulnerable. Caleb didn't come here yesterday out of remorse, Daniel. He came because if you sign those assets back into his control before judgment lands, he might still have something to bargain with." I leaned back slowly. "So he was trying to hide the estate inside mine." "Exactly." She flipped a page. "What's actually left with meaningful equity is mostly one thing. A mixed-use building on Greenville Avenue. Retail on the ground floor, apartments above. Mortgaged, but still carrying about $310,000 in equity. As sole beneficiary under his current documents, you have standing to petition for accelerated transfer of that asset because of his demonstrated financial instability." She slid a prepared petition toward me. "I drafted it last night." From the kitchen, Reuben said, "Of course you did." I picked up the petition, read it once, then again. I thought about Caleb on the couch, the crack in his voice when he said Dad, the Kroger parking lot where I taught him to ride a bike when he was 7, the courtroom, the lie, the fact that he had come to me on my first day of freedom not to make anything right, but to use me as a vault. Then I picked up Nina's pen and signed exactly where the yellow arrow tab pointed. No speech, no flourish, no hesitation. Nina filed it at 9:46 that morning. Reuben drove us downtown. Dallas spread around us in glass and concrete and long strips of traffic. The city had not paused for my conviction. It had not paused for my release. Cities do not care about your ruin or your resurrection. "How do you feel?" Reuben asked. That was the kind of question Reuben asked without apology. "Hungry," I said. He laughed, and it was good to hear him laugh. The next 9 days were almost completely quiet. That is the part nobody tells you about cold revenge. The waiting, the maintenance of ordinary life while the machinery moves invisibly behind the walls. I stayed at Reuben's, helped him fix a warped fence panel because I needed to use my hands for something besides memory. Called an old contact about consulting work on an electrical overhaul in Addison. On day 4, I got a haircut at the same barbershop on Jefferson Boulevard I had used for 15 years and looked at myself in the mirror afterward and saw, for the first time in a very long time, not an inmate, not a defendant, not a father betrayed. Just a man. Caleb called Nina twice during those 9 days. She answered both times in the same professional tone and told him the paperwork was in motion and that Daniel Mercer would contact him when ready. She never said what paperwork. He assumed. He kept assuming. On the morning of May 2nd, Nina called me while I was standing in Reuben's backyard looking at a cardinal on the fence we had repaired. "It's done," she said. "Transfer recorded at 8:11 a.m. The Greenville property is legally yours." I watched the bird another second. "Thank you. Vale's hearing is tomorrow." "I know." "You going?" I thought about that. Another courtroom, another dismantling, another version of my son's life collapsing under the weight of what he had built. I did not need to sit in that room to know it was happening. "No," I said. "I'm not going." I found out afterward from Nina, who had a clerk she knew in the room. Caleb arrived the next morning with a lawyer he clearly couldn't fully afford and a strategy built entirely around the Greenville property equity. His lawyer presented it as a negotiation asset, as proof his client still had means to resolve the matter, as a reason the court should delay. The court pulled the updated deed. Greenville Avenue, owner of record, Daniel Robert Mercer, effective May 2nd. Nina told me Caleb went very still. His lawyer asked for a recess. It was granted. During that recess, Caleb called my phone 4 times. I was at a diner on Lower Greenville eating eggs over easy and reading an actual newspaper like it was 1998. I watched his name light up my screen 4 times and let it ring each time. Not because I enjoyed it, because some moments do not require your voice. Without the Greenville equity, Caleb had nothing meaningful left to offer Conrad Vale. The judgment landed in full. Every asset Caleb still personally controlled became exposed. The Garland rental stayed protected. Texas had done him that one kindness. Everything else was gone. 3 days later, I drove to the Greenville property myself for the first time. It was a decent building. Brick facade, rear drainage issues, one dry cleaner below still operating as though landlords were eternal. 4 apartments above. Good structure, good bones. That is the first thing I notice in any building. The bones. Everything worthwhile starts there. I stood on the sidewalk with my hands in my jacket pockets and looked up at it in the mild Dallas light. Good bones, I thought. I did not go inside. Not yet. I walked back to the Chevy Malibu I had bought with the first payment from my consulting job and drove toward Oak Cliff. On the passenger seat beside me was a single envelope. Inside it was a letter Nina had drafted at my request and I had rewritten twice before signing. Not legal, not binding, just clear. Reuben had dropped it at Caleb's rental the night before. It said 2 things. First, that I had no intention of using the St. Gabriel records against him publicly. What happened to Lena, what he had done, and what he had pinned on me were between him and whatever remained of his conscience. I was not in the business of destroying men who had already done a solid job of that themselves. Second, that the Greenville property was mine and would remain mine. If Caleb Mercer ever wanted a real conversation, one without envelopes, agendas, or documents to sign, he knew exactly where to find Reuben Salazar's porch on Llewellyn Avenue. It was not forgiveness. It was not even mercy. It was simply a door left unlocked. I was 49 years old, too old for speeches, too old for welded-shut rooms. Whether he ever walked back through that door was his problem. I turned onto the highway and let Dallas spread around me, all concrete and speed and indifference. For the first time in years, I did not think about my son at all. I thought about the cardinal, red and alive on the fence, still standing,